I always thought the worst moment of my marriage would be something dramatic, something loud, something impossible to ignore. I imagined if my world ever fell apart, it would come from a fight or a confession or some seismic shift that cracked the ground beneath my feet. But instead, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the most mundane place you can imagine, the passenger seat of my husband's car. It happened quietly, subtly, the way a fault line gives its first tiny tremor. A small detail, a small object that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I'd taken his car because mine was in the shop for a brake replacement. He'd tossed me his keys that morning with that easy smile of his, the one I used to melt for. Just don't look too closely at the mess. He joked. My car is a disaster zone. I laughed, because I always laughed when he said things like that. I didn't know then that the mess he was talking about had nothing to do with the coffee cups or receipts littering the floor. I didn't know the real disaster was hiding somewhere deeper, tucked between the little corners of his life I'd stopped paying attention to. It was late afternoon when I found it. I'd gone through the drive, through to grab a coffee, and pulled into a parking space to reorganize the chaos in the front seat. That's when I noticed the glint of something metallic wedged between the seat and the center console. At first, I assumed it was mine. My engagement ring sometimes slipped off when my fingers were cold. But when I reached down and picked it up, a strange chill ran through my body. It wasn't my ring, not even close. Mine was a classic solitaire, elegant, simple, timeless. This ring was different. It was small, delicate, with a row of tiny diamonds circling the band in a design I'd never seen before. A design I would have remembered, a design I would have asked about. I stared at it for a long moment, my brain scrambling to explain it away. Maybe it was old. Maybe it belonged to his mother. Maybe he'd found it somewhere and forgotten to tell me. Maybe. Every possible excuse flickered through my mind like flashcards in a test I hadn't studied for. But then reality, cold and sharp, cut through all of it. This ring was new. It was polished. It had no scratches, no wear. Someone had put this on their finger recently. Someone had taken it off in this car. Someone who wasn't me. My hands trembled as I held it between my fingers. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, that thudding, sickening rhythm that felt like a warning. I wanted to drop the ring. I wanted to throw it out the window and pretend I'd never found it. I wanted to rewind time and go back to this morning before I knew anything was wrong. But I couldn't. The ring was real. The discovery was real. And the questions flooding my mind were impossible to silence. I took a deep breath and placed the ring on my palm, staring at it like it might start talking, like it might tell me who it belonged to, why it was here, why my husband had it. But all it did was sit there, small and silent and heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. My stomach twisted into knots, and the air in the car suddenly felt thick, suffocating. I rolled down the window just to breathe. The funny thing is, the first emotion I felt wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal. It was fear. A deep, primal fear that maybe I'd been living with a stranger. That maybe the man I trusted, the man I loved, wasn't who I believed he was. That maybe my life, my marriage, my home, all of it was built on a foundation far more fragile than I'd ever realized. I tried to think logically, but logic was slipping through my fingers like sand. Instead, flashes of memories crowded my mind, moments that suddenly felt different in hindsight. The late nights, he said, he was working. The phone he always kept face down. The sudden, unexplained headaches. The nights he was too tired to talk. The weekends he went out running errands and came home without any groceries. Things I'd brushed off because that's what trusting wives do. We believe our husbands. We give them the benefit of the doubt. We don't assume the worst. We don't assume they're hiding a second wedding ring in their car. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come yet. Instead, I felt a strange numbness, as if my emotions were trying to protect me from what they knew was coming. I kept turning the ring over in my hand, studying its smooth surface, the tiny diamonds, the engraving inside the band. And that was what made my heart stop. There were initials, not mine, not his. A pair of initials I didn't recognize. A date from 3 months ago. 3 months. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me harder than anything ever had. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't from his past. She wasn't from before me. She was recent. She was current. She was someone he'd been seeing while still married to me. Someone he'd promised something to, maybe even everything. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the ring again. I leaned back in the seat, clutching the wheel with my free hand, as if the world might spin out of control. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready for them. I needed the truth, but I wasn't sure I could survive it. I stared out the windshield, the parking lot suddenly blurred and unfamiliar, as if the entire world had shifted a few inches to the left. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. My husband wasn't just lying to me. He was living another life, and I had just found the proof. For a long time, I just sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel with one hand and the ring with the other, feeling the weight of two realities pressing against each other. The life I thought I had and the life I apparently actually did. The version where my husband loved me, respected me, chose me, and the version where he hid another woman's wedding ring in his car like some kind of sick secret. I felt like I'd been split into two people, the woman who trusted him and the woman who suddenly didn't know if she ever should have. I didn't even realize how long I'd been sitting there until my coffee went cold. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I placed the ring gently into the small cup holder, as if it were fragile enough to break, though the truth was, I was the one breaking. I started the car and drove home in a daze, every street and stoplight blurring together. My mind felt like a tornado of what-ifs, whys, and how could he's, none of which had answers yet. When I finally pulled into our driveway, everything looked painfully normal. The flower pots I watered every morning. The porch swing he installed for my birthday. The welcome mat we bought on our honeymoon. It all stood there mocking me, like props in a play I didn't realize I was acting in. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house as if stepping inside would make the truth more real. I picked up the ring before I got out. It felt heavier now, as if absorbing my fear and anger with each passing second. When I walked inside, the familiar scent of vanilla candles and fresh laundry hit me. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt suffocating. I placed my purse and keys on the table, but when I tried to set the ring down, I couldn't. My fingers wouldn't release it. As if letting go meant admitting something I wasn't ready to accept. I wandered into the kitchen, still clutching the ring, and leaned against the counter. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos. Should I confront him? Should I pretend I hadn't found it and wait to see what he did next? Should I investigate before saying anything? Every option felt like stepping onto a minefield. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. He was home. I looked at the time. I'd forgotten he said he'd be working from home that afternoon. His office door creaked open, and a moment later, he appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling down at me like nothing in the world was wrong. That smile used to make me warm. Now it made me nauseous. "Hey, babe," he said casually. "You're back early?" I swallowed hard and forced a smile, my cheeks tight. "Yeah, the car shop said it'll take longer than expected." He walked down the stairs, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I felt the ring burning a hole in my palm, hidden behind my back. His eyes swept over me with that easy familiarity that once felt comforting. Now it felt invasive, like he'd stolen something from me and was pretending everything was normal. "You okay?" He asked, narrowing his eyes. "You look pale." I forced a laugh, too quick, too thin. "Just tired." He nodded, accepting the answer far too easily. If our roles were reversed, I would have pressed further. I would have noticed something was off. But he didn't. That should have hurt less than it did, but it stung deeply. Maybe he didn't ask because he was guilty. Or maybe he didn't ask because he didn't care. He kissed my forehead before walking past me, and every cell in my body flinched. I tried to hide it, but I felt it, an involuntary recoil I didn't recognize in myself. I'd never recoiled from him before. And yet, now, every instinct was screaming at me to pull away from the man whose touch once felt like home. He went into the living room, scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious. I watched him from the doorway, studying every movement like a detective, analyzing a suspect. His jawline I used to trace. His hair I used to run my fingers through. His hands, his shoulders, his posture, all of it felt suddenly foreign. Who was this man? What else had he lied about? What else was he hiding? My throat tightened. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to confront him yet, not without knowing more. If I confronted him too soon, he'd talk circles around me. He was good at that, charming, persuasive, calm under pressure. He'd figure out a way to twist the narrative until I questioned my own sanity. Not this time. I wasn't giving him that chance. I slipped quietly upstairs while he remained absorbed in whatever was happening on his screen. In our bedroom, I finally opened my hand. The ring lay there, innocent and merciless, gleaming under the soft afternoon light. I grabbed my phone and took pictures from every angle, the design, the engraving, the date. Then I zoomed in. The initials were AM, and the date engraved beneath them was from exactly 93 days ago. I sat down on the edge of the bed, exhaling shakily. 93 days ago, what had been happening then? Where had he been? What excuses had he given me? I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember. That week, he had been out of town for a conference I'd never questioned, because that's what trusting wives do. He'd sent photos of himself in suits, standing outside a hotel attending seminars. Now I wondered if those photos were staged. Now I wondered who had taken them. Now I wondered if the woman with the initials, AM, was sitting right beside him when he took them. I opened his closet, scanning for anything unusual. His laundry basket, his jacket pockets, the suitcase he'd used for that trip. At first, I found nothing. But then, shoved behind a stack of folded sweaters, I found something else that made my blood run cold. A small velvet jewelry box. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. Inside was a delicate necklace, rose gold, with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. I'd never seen it before. It wasn't for me. I would have remembered. I sank to the floor, my back against the bed, clutching the necklace in one hand and the ring in the other. The evidence was undeniable now. There wasn't just a ring. There were gifts. Hidden gifts. Gifts meant for someone he cared about enough to keep secret. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was betrayal. And it was war. I don't know how long I sat on that bedroom floor, staring at the necklace and the ring as if they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something harmless, something innocent. But they didn't. They stayed exactly what they were, proof that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. Evidence that somewhere out there was another woman who wore a ring engraved with a date connected to my husband. A woman who might even think he belonged to her. A woman who might have been promised something or lied to or manipulated. Or worse, she might not even know I exist. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the jewelry down on the carpet just to steady myself. This wasn't the kind of betrayal that came from a meaningless fling or one drunken mistake. This felt planned, intentional. Like he'd been living two lives, and I was only ever seeing the half he allowed me to see. A sudden sound downstairs snapped me out of my haze, the familiar ding of the microwave door opening. He was heating leftovers, going about his day, completely unaware that I was upstairs uncovering his secrets piece by piece. The normalcy of it made my skin crawl. How many times had he eaten dinner with me, smiled at me, held me, while hiding a second wedding ring in his car? The thought made bile rise in my throat. I needed to pull myself together. I needed to think, because whatever this was, it wasn't something I could handle emotionally. I had to be strategic, smart, calculated. If I confronted him now, I'd be walking into a carefully constructed trap. He'd deny everything. Or worse, he'd have an explanation ready, a lie polished enough to make me doubt what I was holding in my hands. No, I needed more information. I needed the full picture before I made any move. I picked up the ring again, tracing the initials with my thumb. AM. Who was she? Someone from work. Someone he'd met on a trip. Someone local. A name floated through my mind. Amanda, a coworker he mentioned once or twice. Then Amy, someone he'd known from college. But the truth was, those initials could belong to anyone. The possibilities spun through my mind, each more horrifying than the last. Then my phone buzzed. I jumped, my heart pounding as I looked at the screen. It was him. A simple text. Are you upstairs? Dinner's ready if you're hungry. My breath hitched. The irony almost made me laugh. Here, he was offering me dinner like a good husband, while the evidence of his betrayal lay scattered across our bedroom floor. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Yeah, I'll be down in a minute. I needed more time. I needed to get the jewelry hidden again before he came upstairs. I couldn't risk him discovering I'd found them. Not yet. I placed the necklace and the ring into my purse, zipping it shut quickly, as if he might burst through the door any second. Then I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and forced some semblance of normalcy onto my expression before heading downstairs. He was plating food when I reached the kitchen, humming softly to himself. An easy, relaxed melody. One that suddenly made me sick to hear. There was something unsettling about how calm he seemed. How carefree. As if nothing at all was wrong. But that was the thing about men like him. They were masters at acting, at presenting whatever version of themselves they wanted the world to see. He looked up when he heard me. There you are. Everything okay? I nodded. Just tired. He smiled sympathetically. Long day? I could have laughed at the absurdity. He had no idea just how long my day had been. Instead, I nodded again and forced myself to sit across from him at the table. The food smelled good, pasta, my favorite, but I couldn't stomach even a bite. My appetite had vanished the moment I found that ring. He took a forkful and studied me as he chewed. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just a headache." He made a small sound of understanding, then reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. That touch used to comfort me. Now it sent a jolt of revulsion through me, but I kept still. I couldn't let him know. "Not yet. I'm here if you need anything," he said, his voice low and sincere. Sincere. God, how many times had he used that tone on her? I forced a weak smile. "Thanks." He went back to eating, and I studied him carefully. Every expression, every gesture, every word, he seemed so normal, so unbothered, and that terrified me most, because it meant he'd rehearsed this, lived this double life so long that it had become second nature. While he ate, his phone buzzed beside his plate. I watched him casually glance at it before flipping it face down. My blood ran cold. He never used to do that. Not before. Not until recently. And then I realized something. The phone. That was the missing piece. If I wanted the truth, that was where it lived. Not in his face, not in his voice, but in the device he guarded like treasure. I needed access to his phone. The thought hit me with a clarity I hadn't felt all day. That was my next step. If there was any message, any call log, any photo, any thread connecting him to AM, that was where it would be. The trick was getting it. That night, I lay awake in bed beside him. He fell asleep easily, his breathing deep and even as if he didn't have a single secret weighing on his chest. I stared at the ceiling, planning, counting his breaths, waiting for the perfect moment. When his breathing shifted into the slow rhythm of deep sleep, I quietly rolled onto my side and watched him. His face was peaceful, almost innocent, and that made everything worse. Because sometimes the scariest monsters look like the people we love. Very slowly, very carefully, I reached toward his nightstand. My fingers hovered just above his phone. This was it. The moment everything would change. My fingers trembled as they hovered above his phone. Even though the room was dark, it felt like the phone was glowing, radiating danger, truth, and the unraveling of everything I thought I understood about my life. The air felt thick, heavy, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Every instinct in me screamed to pull back, to crawl under the covers, to forget what I'd found earlier and pretend my world wasn't cracking open. But the stronger instinct, the one that had been whispering ever since I found that ring, told me to go forward. I took a slow breath and carefully lifted the phone from the nightstand. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it held every lie he'd ever told. My heart pounded so loudly, I was terrified he'd hear it and wake up. But his breathing stayed steady, deep, oblivious. I pressed the home button. The lock screen lit up with a soft glow, illuminating his face in the dark. He didn't flinch. The screen asked for a passcode. Of course. I swallowed hard. What did he use? His old 4-digit code, his birthday, mine, our anniversary. For years, he'd used the same one, 07/10/45, the time we got married. But last year, he changed it, laughing about password hygiene. At the time, I thought it was cute. Now it felt sinister. I typed our anniversary date. Wrong. My birthday. Wrong. His birthday. Wrong. I stared at the screen, panic rising. I had one more attempt before the phone locked me out for good. His breathing shifted slightly, and I froze, staring at him, but he didn't wake. I slowly exhaled. Think, what number did he repeat? What had he mentioned? What meant something to him but not to us? Then it hit me. 93 days ago. The engraving inside the ring. That date. That cursed hidden date. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't be that stupid or that arrogant. But what if he was? My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed the date from the ring. I hesitated before hitting the last digit. If I was wrong, that was it. No more tries tonight. But if I was right, I pressed it. The screen unlocked. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was worse than arrogance. It was confidence. He wasn't hiding from me. He didn't think he needed to. He never imagined I'd look. He thought I'd trust him forever. The home screen glowed in my hand, and for a moment I just stared at it, shock and nausea wrestling inside me. My husband's digital world, the one he guarded so tightly, was now open to me like a wound. I swiped to his messages. My breath caught. There were names I recognized, friends, coworkers, family. But then there was one name I didn't recognize at all. AM. Of course. My fingers felt cold, numb, but I tapped the thread anyway. Messages filled the screen. At first, just a few short texts jumped out at me. Casual, familiar, intimate. I miss you already. When can I see you again? I can't stop thinking about you. The room spun. The bed beneath me felt like it shifted. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my throat. I scrolled. There were photos, not indecent, but intimate. A woman's hand with that same ring I had found in his car. Her skin smooth, her nails manicured. A picture of her holding a coffee cup in a cafe I didn't recognize. A blurry selfie of her smiling at him from what looked like a hotel hallway. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it cracked. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a mistake. This was a relationship, a parallel life. More messages. I told you I don't like lying to her. Just a little longer, she wrote back. We knew this would be complicated, but you promised. I just need more time. I don't want to hurt her. You're not hurting her. She typed. You're choosing us. Choosing us. The words stung like acid. I kept scrolling, unable to stop myself, as if the more pain I collected, the more prepared I'd be for whatever came next. Most of the messages were emotional, like two people building a story together. A story I had no idea existed. They had inside jokes, pet names, routines. She called him my heart. He called her Angel. Angel. He'd never called me anything like that. There was a message from 2 weeks ago, one that made me feel dizzy. Did you tell her yet? He had replied, not yet. I will after the trip next month. What trip? He hadn't mentioned any trip to me. I scrolled further, my hands shaking, until I found it. A flight confirmation sent to her. 2 tickets. Under his name and hers. They were planning a trip together. A vacation. A getaway. A future. My stomach twisted violently, and for a moment I thought I'd be sick. I pressed a hand to my mouth and breathed slowly to keep from falling apart. Then I saw something that made my entire body go numb. A message from her. Did you pick up the ring? I read it 3 times before the meaning settled in. She wasn't wearing the ring I found. It was for her. A second wedding ring. A symbol of a promise. A symbol of a life he intended to start with her. And then his response, simple, casual, lethal. Yeah, it's in the car. My vision blurred. Tears finally filled my eyes, hot and overwhelming, spilling onto my cheeks before I could stop them. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle the sob trying to escape. He stirred beside me, shifting slightly, and I froze again. After a moment, he settled back into sleep, but I didn't. I stayed awake, gripping his phone, drowning in grief and rage and disbelief. I had the truth now, and the truth was far worse than anything I'd imagined. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was preparing to replace me. I sat frozen in the darkness, the glow from his phone screen casting a faint light across the sheets. My tears had slowed, but my breath still quivered in my chest, shallow and uneven. I didn't know a person could feel so many emotions at once: grief, anger, disbelief, humiliation, fear, and something else I hadn't expected at all: clarity. A strange, cold clarity that settled into my bones, steadying me even as my world fell apart. The truth was out now. He wasn't just drifting. He wasn't confused. He wasn't in a rough patch or unhappy or having a midlife crisis. He was building another life entirely, a life with a different woman, one he'd bought a ring for, one he lied for, one he used my trust to protect. I looked at him sleeping beside me, and the sight changed something in me permanently. The man I thought I loved wasn't lying next to me. A stranger who had kissed me goodnight while planning a future with someone else. A stranger who could hold two realities in his hands without flinching. A stranger who had been planning to tear my life apart and thought he could do it quietly. Carefully, I set his phone back on the nightstand. I needed it exactly where he'd left it. If he realized I'd gone through it, everything would spiral before I was ready. I couldn't let him know yet. I couldn't let him control the narrative. He'd talk, twist, charm, manipulate. He was good at that. Too good. Slowly, I slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom. I shut the door quietly, locked it, and sat on the cold tile floor. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone else, someone broken, someone small. But her eyes were sharp, focused, awake. I wiped my tears and took a trembling breath. I needed a plan. The first thing I did was take out my phone and photograph everything: screenshots of their messages, the trip confirmation, the ring in my purse, the necklace. I uploaded everything to a hidden folder in the cloud and emailed them to myself from a different account. I wasn't giving him the chance to delete or deny anything. Next, I Googled the initials AM along with his company name. Only one result seemed likely: a woman named Alina Meyer, a freelance designer his firm had worked with several times over the last year. There were photos of her online, pretty, polished, smiling. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged in curated Instagram cafes and destination weddings. And judging by her LinkedIn, she lived only 20 minutes away. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a fantasy flirtation with someone miles away. She was close, accessible, real. And judging by the messages, she fully believed he was leaving me. I wondered, did she even know I existed? Did she think he was single, divorced, unhappily married? Or did she know he was lying to me every day? I pressed my hands to my eyes, breathing slowly. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Not until I had all the information. But the knowledge alone made my pulse race. I sat in the bathroom for nearly an hour, thinking, planning, preparing. The one thing I refused to do was collapse. If I collapsed tonight, I'd lose control. I'd act on emotion instead of strategy. And strategies were how you survive betrayal like this. By the time I returned to bed, he was still snoring quietly. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the final pieces of my heart harden into something unrecognizable. I stayed awake until the sky began to lighten, waiting for the moment he would wake up. When his alarm went off at 700, he blinked awake and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "Morning," he said, stretching. I forced a tired smile. "Morning." He leaned over and kissed my cheek, and I had to bite the inside of my lip to stop myself from recoiling. Every instinct screamed at me to get away from him, but I kept still. I needed to. "I've got an early meeting," he said as he slipped out of bed. "I'll be home late tonight. Don't wait up." There it was. Another lie. Another night with her. My voice felt like sandpaper. "Okay." He showered, shaved, dressed, moving through his morning routine, like a man with nothing on his conscience. I watched him carefully, studied every detail, the way he hummed softly, the way he checked his phone twice, the way he glanced at me with casual affection before leaving the room. "I love you," he said before heading to the door. Something inside me snapped. For the first time, I didn't say it back. He paused just for a moment and looked at me with mild confusion. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired." He smiled again, satisfied, and left. I waited until I heard his car pull away. Then I got out of bed, closed the blinds, and let the tears come, quiet, violent sobs that ripped from my chest like something had burst. But even as I cried, I felt something else rising beneath it. A strength I didn't know I had. A fire. A determination that came from the rawest, most wounded part of me. I wasn't going to let him leave me blindsided. I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story. I wasn't going to let him slip into a new life while I quietly fell apart. No. If he wanted a war, he was about to get one. First, I needed a lawyer. Second, I needed to gather everything. And third, the hardest part, I needed to prepare myself for what came next. Because this wasn't just about a ring. This was about betrayal. This was about identity. This was about a man who thought he could live a double life, and I'd never know. And now that I did know, I was going to burn his lies to the ground. The house felt different the moment he left. Empty, but not the peaceful kind of empty that comes when someone goes to work for the day. It felt hollow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, like everything inside these rooms knew the truth before I did. The silence pressed against me, thick and heavy, but it also gave me space to think clearly for the first time since yesterday afternoon. I stood in the kitchen gripping a mug I wasn't drinking from, staring at the front door as if he might burst back in. Part of me half expected it, like he could sense from miles away that I'd unraveled his secrets in the dark. But he didn't come back. He drove off to whatever life he was living when he wasn't with me, confident, calm, unaware that everything had changed. Once I was sure he was gone for the day, I forced myself into motion. I couldn't afford to sit in shock any longer. Grief was a luxury I'd deal with later. Right now, I needed information, steps, strategy. I needed to understand everything before I took my next move. I sat at the dining table, opened my laptop, and created a new password-protected folder, Digital Evidence, Phase 1. Inside, I started organizing everything I'd saved, screenshots from his phone, photos of the ring, the necklace, and notes I had typed in the bathroom documenting what I'd seen. I included dates, times, my observations. The truth needed to be written before he had the chance to distort it. Then I opened a new document titled Timeline. I began typing out every moment I could remember from the last year. When the distance started, when he changed his phone password, when he started working late, when he took more business trips, when he stopped asking me questions, when he stopped touching me like someone in love, when he started checking out emotionally Or maybe when I finally noticed he already had. Each entry brought a painful sting. But as the list grew, I felt something shift inside me. Patterns emerged. Clues I hadn't seen before. Signs that seemed small alone, but screamed the truth in hindsight. I remembered how he'd insisted on separate bank accounts for personal spending, even though we'd always pooled money before. I remembered how he'd started buying new clothes without telling me. Nicer ones, the kind you buy when you're trying to impress someone. I remembered finding a receipt months ago for a dinner at a restaurant we'd never visited together. When I'd asked, he brushed it off as a work event. Work. He used that excuse like a shield. My fingers paused above the keyboard as a new realization hit me. If he was taking her on trips and buying her gifts, the money had to come from somewhere. I opened our joint banking app and scrolled through the statements. Most of it looked normal: mortgage, groceries, utilities. But deeper down, buried among the expenses, were transfers. Small ones at first, then larger. Transfers from our account into his personal account. And worse, cash withdrawals. Hundreds at a time. He wasn't just cheating emotionally. He was using our money to finance it. The betrayal burned fresh, like someone pressing a hot iron into my chest. I took screenshots of every suspicious transaction. As soon as they uploaded to my evidence folder, I exhaled shakily. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for an hour. Next, I Googled divorce attorneys in the area, not because I was ready to file that second, but because I needed professional guidance before confronting him. I needed someone who could tell me what my rights were, what steps I should take, and what traps to avoid. Men who lead double lives tend to be good at manipulating outcomes to their advantage. I wasn't giving him the chance. I jotted down 3 firms that specialized in complex or high conflict divorces. I bookmarked their pages and made notes about consultations. But then I hesitated. Calling a lawyer wasn't my next immediate step. No, the next step was understanding her. Not because I wanted to compare myself to her, or stalk her, or blame her, but because she held part of the truth. Because she might know things I didn't. Because she might believe she was the only woman in his life. I searched her name again. Her Instagram was public. Perfect photos, pastel color palettes, aesthetic coffee cups, and smiling selfies. Her captions were sweet, almost naive. She looked younger than me, mid-20s, maybe. And it didn't seem like the type to knowingly participate in breaking a marriage. She seemed, or at least unaware. One post stopped me cold. It was from 2 weeks ago. A blurred shot of a man sitting across the table from her at a restaurant. Only his hands were visible, tan skin, a silver watch, a familiar wedding, bantan line, counting down the days until everything finally falls into place. The caption read, my stomach twisted. Everything falling into place. Her tone didn't feel like someone having an affair with a married man. It felt like someone waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. Someone who believed she was entering a real future, not stealing someone else's husband. Was she a victim of his lies too? I copied the post, saved the image, and logged off quickly before my emotions spiraled. There would be time later to untangle what role she played in all this. But right now, I needed clarity, not distraction. I stood and walked upstairs straight into our bedroom. The space felt like a crime scene now, a carefully curated stage where he'd look me in the eyes. While hiding another life, I opened his dresser drawers, scanning their contents. Nothing unusual. I checked his nightstand. Just chargers, receipts, a book he never finished. Then I opened the bottom drawer, the one he rarely used. Inside was a small shoebox. My pulse quickened. I pulled it out and lifted the lid. Inside were printed hotel confirmations, receipts from dinners I'd never attended, a tie I'd never seen him wear, and a handwritten note on a small card. The note made my hands go numb. To the man who makes me feel chosen. Below it, the initials AM, and then, scribbled lightly in pencil, in his handwriting soon. The floor felt like it tilted beneath me. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't an impulsive affair. This was deliberate, calculated, premeditated. He wasn't planning to leave me eventually. He was planning to leave me soon. And yet, he was still sleeping beside me, still kissing me goodbye, still eating dinner at our table, still pretending. I stood there holding the box, my breath shaking, my vision blurring at the edges. If I confronted him today, he'd lie. If I confronted him tomorrow, he'd twist everything. If I confronted him unprepared, he might beat me to the punch. No, not yet. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly what he was planning next. I set the shoebox on the bed and stared at it like it was a bomb with the timer ticking down. Every object inside it, every receipt, every note, every hotel confirmation was another thread in a web he'd spun behind my back. A web I had walked into blindfolded, trusting him, loving him, believing the fantasy he fed me. Now each piece of paper felt like a blade he'd carefully, methodically slipped between my ribs. I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to think. I needed to zoom out. Betrayal has a way of shrinking your world until it feels like you're drowning in the smallest details. I had to stay focused. The question wasn't just what he had done. It was what he planned to do next and when. I pulled the receipts closer. The dates were scattered across the last 5 months. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant far too expensive for a casual work meeting. A hotel reservation under his name. A second hotel reservation a month later. A bill from a jewelry store, the same one where he bought my anniversary bracelet years ago. But the receipt in front of me wasn't for a bracelet. It listed 2 items. One I recognized, the necklace I'd found hidden. The second one, described as a custom ring engraving, sent a chill up my spine. My throat tightened. He'd used that jewelry store for both women. Me and her. I rubbed my forehead hard, willing myself not to fall apart again. I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the jewelry store receipt. A woman answered pleasantly, introducing herself. My palms were sweating so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm calling about an order placed a little while ago under my husband's name. I just wanted to confirm something about the purchase." "Of course," she said. "Can I have the receipt number?" I gave it to her. There was a brief pause, the clicking of a keyboard. "Yes, I see the order here. A necklace and a ring." My stomach twisted. "Can I ask, was the ring picked up already?" "Yes," she said. "It was collected the same day it was ordered." Be him. Another pause. "Yes," he signed for it. My heart thudded painfully. I already knew the answer, but hearing it confirmed sliced deeper than I expected. I forced a polite thank you and ended the call. So he'd picked up the ring, her ring. He hadn't misplaced it accidentally. He hadn't forgotten about it in the car. He'd placed it there. On purpose, carelessly, I couldn't know. But the important detail was that he had it in his possession, meaning he intended to give it to her. And I had just interrupted the timeline. A surge of panic rushed through me. He might have noticed it missing already. He might realize something was wrong. No, he was too confident, too comfortable. He hadn't checked the car today. He wouldn't until later. I still had time. Not much, but enough. I tucked the box back exactly where it had been, same angle, same depth, and closed the drawer carefully. Then I grabbed my purse containing the ring and necklace. I couldn't risk leaving them here where he might find them missing. I needed them with me. My next stop was the home office. His laptop was sitting on the desk, open but asleep. I hesitated before touching it. He'd know if I woke it up. Or would he? Maybe not. But I couldn't risk triggering some alert or waking the screen if he had notifications set to pop up. So I left it alone. Instead, I went to his filing cabinet. The top drawer was filled with tax forms, pay stubs, business receipts. All neat and in order, just the way he liked it. But the second drawer, that one was messy, piled with old documents, envelopes, scattered paperwork. Too messy for him. That alone made me suspicious. I dug through the stack and found something that made my pulse spike. Plane tickets, printed, tangible copies of the confirmation I had seen on his phone. 2 names. His and hers. A departure date 3 weeks from now. Destination Santorini. Santorini. The place I had always dreamt of going. The place we promised we'd visit for our 10th anniversary. The place he apparently decided to take her instead. I felt tears threaten again, but I swallowed them down with bitter resolve. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was symbolic, intentional, cruel. As I stared at the tickets, another thought hit me, heavy, unavoidable. If he was planning this trip 3 weeks from now, then there had to be more preparations, conversations, bookings. Something else that tied the plan together. I checked his briefcase next. Inside were folders, work documents, and a small leather-bound notebook. He used to journal sometimes, but he'd stopped around the time he got busy. I flipped through it, my fingers trembling. Most of the pages were work-related. Notes from meetings, ideas, reminders. But then I reached a page where my blood went cold. 3-week timeline. Underneath, bullet points. Tell her. Move things to storage. Finalize papers. Book Greece itinerary. Transition plan. Transition plan. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes again. I wiped them away angrily. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking me before I had all the pieces. He wasn't planning a divorce. He was planning an exit. An orchestrated one. Quiet. Controlled. One where he got to decide the story. Where he filed first with everything already sorted. Where I was forced to accept it because he'd framed it as inevitable. Where he left as the reasonable, organized, composed man, and I was left scrambling, shocked, blindsided, humiliated. He wasn't just cheating. He was staging a replacement, a carefully timed removal of me from the picture. And I had found out too early. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. He had no idea that his timeline was collapsing, that his silent exit strategy was no longer silent, that his perfect transition plan was now the blueprint I would use to dismantle him. I stood in the office doorway, gripping my purse tightly, feeling something raw and powerful rise inside me. He thought he was ahead. He thought he was in control. He had no idea the clock had just started ticking for him too. And I wasn't just going to beat him to the finish line. I was going to destroy the path he thought he owned. I left the office and walked straight into the living room, pacing in slow circles as the weight of everything pressed against my ribs. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. That frantic rhythm of a person who has just realized their entire life has been held together by someone else's lies. But beneath the panic, beneath the heartbreak, something fiercer was growing, something steady, something sharp. He had a 3-week plan. Well, now I had one too. But mine wouldn't end with me crying on a beach in Santorini wondering how my life had imploded. No. Mine would end with me standing, not broken, not blindsided, prepared, with the truth as my weapon, not his. I took a deep breath, trying to quiet the shaking in my hands. I needed to think strategically. Every step from here on out mattered. First step, I had to secure myself financially. He was already siphoning money out of our joint account. The cash withdrawals made that obvious. If he was planning to leave, he'd want as much leverage as possible. I opened my banking app again and checked the balances. Our joint account had enough for a few months of bills, but his personal account, the one he claimed he used only for work lunches and personal things, had almost triple that amount. He had been preparing for a long time. I transferred what I legally could from our joint account into my personal one, the one he'd insisted I keep for fun money. Funny how that insult now became my lifeline. I didn't wipe the joint account clean. That would have tipped him off. I left just enough to look normal, enough to keep him unaware for now. Next, I needed a separate physical space for my evidence. I grabbed a small fireproof box from the hall closet, one we used for passports and old tax forms, and replaced the contents with printed copies of everything I'd gathered. I added the USB stick I'd backed up files to. Then I hid the box in the laundry room under a basket of towels no one touched. He never did laundry. He would never find it there. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten anything since yesterday afternoon. I forced myself into the kitchen, but the moment I opened the fridge, my appetite vanished. How many of these meals had I cooked while he texted her under the table? How many dinners had I made for a man who was planning a future with someone else? The thought made my skin crawl. I closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, pressing my palms into the cool surface. I needed fuel, but I also needed air. I grabbed my keys and purse, careful to ensure the ring and necklace were still safely inside, and headed out the door. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew staying in that house another second would suffocate me. I drove aimlessly at first, my thoughts louder than the engine. The world outside felt strange, like I was floating through it, like everything had shifted a few inches to the left. People on the sidewalks laughed, walked dogs, held hands, bought lunch, as if the entire world hadn't just realigned violently for me, as if everything wasn't crashing down. Eventually, I ended up in a quiet park near the edge of town, the kind with wooden benches and an empty walking trail. I parked and sat, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. A subtle breeze blew through the open window, brushing my cheek, grounding me a little. I needed advice, real advice. But I couldn't trust friends yet, not until I knew exactly how deep his deception ran. He was charming. He got into people's heads. If he sensed something was wrong, he could use anyone around us to manipulate the narrative. No, I couldn't risk that. I needed someone who didn't know him. I opened my phone's browser and searched for the first attorney on my list. The firm had stellar reviews and specialized in protecting clients blindsided by marital betrayal. My heart pounded as I hit call. A receptionist answered cheerfully, but when I tried to speak, my voice cracked. I swallowed and tried again, forcing the words out. I need to schedule a consultation. It's urgent. She asked for basics, name, contact, whether it was about divorce, infidelity, or financial concerns. I answered carefully, trying not to crumble. When she offered a slot at 3 p.m. that afternoon, I took it. That was only 4 hours away. 4 hours until someone professional could tell me exactly what to do. After ending the call, I sagged against the seat, exhausted. Step one handled. But what came next? As I stared out the window, the universe answered me with a sharp jolt. My phone buzzed. A text from him. "Hey babe, everything okay?" My stomach churned. He never checked in this early. Was it guilt? Instinct? Or had he noticed the ring missing? My fingers shook as I typed it. Yes. Just running errands. Another message came immediately. "Love you." It felt like a blade twisting inside me. I stared at the screen for a full minute, frozen. What was the appropriate response when your husband said, "I love you," while planning to leave you? Eventually, I typed the safest thing possible. "You too." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the truth. It was neutral, something he wouldn't analyze. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, feeling sick. It buzzed again. This time, the message was different. "Don't forget I'm home late tonight. Might be closer to midnight." Midnight. Another lie. Another night with her. The anger that surged through me wasn't a sharp explosion. It was slow, simmering, controlled. A quiet fire. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because now I wasn't the one being deceived. I was the one watching, the one planning, the one gathering every piece of evidence he didn't know was missing. And then another thought hit me, unexpected, unwelcome, but incredibly important. If he was meeting her tonight, what if I followed him? What if I saw where he went? Who he met? What if I confirmed the truth with my own eyes? It wasn't just curiosity. It was evidence. And something inside me whispered, strong and steady, you need to see it. You need to know. You need to witness the life he thinks you'll never discover. My fingers curled around the steering wheel as the decision crystallized. Tonight, I would follow him, and I would watch the truth unfold. The idea lingered in my mind like a whisper I kept pretending I didn't hear, even though it grew louder with every passing minute tonight. I would follow him. I wasn't reckless by nature. I wasn't the dramatic type, the kind of woman who spies, plots, schemes. But betrayal rewires you. It rearranges your instincts. It forces you into versions of yourself you never imagined you'd have to become. And tonight, I wasn't a wife. I was a witness. When I finally left the park, I drove home with a determination that surprised even me. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage set for a performance I hadn't realized I'd been acting in. But now I knew my role, and tonight's act would be mine, not his. I walked up the driveway quickly, scanning the neighborhood out of pure paranoia, though I didn't know what exactly I was afraid of. Maybe that he'd show up unexpectedly. Maybe that I'd see something else I wasn't meant to. Maybe that the world would look different now that I saw him differently. Inside, the house was still. I slipped my shoes off, grabbed my phone, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the clock. Every second felt loud, deliberate, mocking. I had several hours before my attorney meeting, and even more hours before he'd leave for wherever he was going tonight. I needed to prepare. I pulled out my laptop, opened the evidence folder again, and began writing down every possible scenario that could happen tonight. If he drove straight to her home, if he met her somewhere else, if he went to a hotel, if he was cautious, if he noticed he was being followed, if he changed plans last minute, It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. I scribbled notes, reminders, cues to look for, questions I needed answered. I didn't need closure, not the emotional kind. I needed clarity. I needed proof. Because once I confronted him, once the truth was out in the open, there would be no turning back. And I wanted to walk into that confrontation armed with certainty. The minutes stretched, dragging on as if time itself were resisting me. When the clock finally ticked to 2:30, I grabbed my purse and headed to the car. My heart thudded heavily as I drove to the attorney's office, every mile echoing the reality of what I was doing. I was preparing for a life without him, a life he'd already started building without me, long before I caught up. The attorney's office was a sleek building with glass windows and an immaculate lobby. The receptionist greeted me kindly, offering a soft smile that felt like a lifeline. "Your attorney will be with you shortly," she said. I thanked her and sat down, nerves buzzing beneath my skin. When the attorney finally called my name, I followed her into a private room with a polished wooden desk and shelves lined with law books. She had calm eyes and an air of competence that immediately steadied me. "How can I help you today?" she asked. The words stuck in my throat for a moment. Then I exhaled shakily. My husband is planning to leave me. He's been living a double life. I found evidence, financial, emotional, everything. I laid out the facts carefully, leaving out none of the relevant details. Not the ring, not the messages, not the timeline, not the trip, not the notebook. She listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression sympathetic but professionally focused. "You did the right thing coming here now," she said. "You're ahead of him. That gives you leverage. And what happens next?" I asked quietly. She outlined my options, what I could do legally, financially, strategically. She advised me not to confront him until everything was documented and secure. She suggested freezing certain accounts, temporarily monitoring joint finances, and quietly copying any relevant documents he might try to hide later. She told me to protect myself emotionally and financially before making any move. Her words gave me structure, a path. Hope wasn't the right word, but a plan was the next best thing. "You can absolutely protect yourself," she said, her tone firm. "And when the moment comes, he won't be able to manipulate the situation in his favor. You'll be prepared?" I nodded, swallowing the mix of gratitude and sorrow swelling in my chest. I didn't want to be prepared for a divorce. I wanted my marriage to be what I thought it was. But that version of my life was gone now. When I left the office, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. The world suddenly looked darker, colder, but also clearer. I felt steadier than I had this morning, empty, but steadier. Now came the hardest part, following him tonight. I drove home, rehearsing the plan again and again in my head. I'd wait for him to come home, act normal, act tired, maybe even pretend to fall asleep on the couch. He'd tell me he had to go into the office or see a coworker or run an errand, whatever lie he had prepared. Then he'd leave, and I'd follow. Back in the house, I paced the living room, double-checking my purse phone, fully charged, screenshot backups, the ring, the necklace, the address of the attorney, and even pepper spray, just in case. I didn't know what I'd face tonight. I wasn't naive. Hours crawled by. The sky turned indigo. Streetlights flickered on. My nerves tightened with every tick of the clock. Finally, around 7:15 p.m., I heard the garage door open. My heart jumped. He was home. I wiped my palms on my jeans and sat casually on the couch, pretending to scroll my phone. He walked into the living room, loosening his tie, smiling at me with that easy expression, like he wasn't a man planning to disappear from my life. "Hey," he said warmly. "How was your day?" My voice nearly cracked, but I kept it level. "Fine. Tiring." He nodded sympathetically. "I have a few things I need to finish up tonight. Might need to head back out later." There it was. The lie. The same lie he'd used for months. My pulse quickened, but I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "That's fine. I'll probably head to bed early." He smiled, relieved I wasn't asking questions. Perfect. He had no idea I planned to follow him into the truth. He disappeared into the bedroom to change, humming under his breath like a man without a care in the world. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't seen the cracks spreading across the surface of our life like fractures in glass, I might have thought everything was normal. But now every casual movement felt rehearsed. Every smile felt borrowed. Every step he took sounded like footsteps, echoing down the hallway of a life he'd already mentally left. I sat on the couch, watching the soft glow of the lamp cast shadows over the walls. Shadows that seemed to move like stories I hadn't been told yet. At 8:02 p.m., he walked out of the bedroom wearing a fresh shirt and cologne. Not too formal, not too casual. The kind of outfit a man wears when he wants to look good for someone who isn't his wife. "Don't wait up," he said lightly, grabbing his keys. "I'll try not to stay out too late, but you know how these project deadlines get." I nodded, careful not to let my voice betray the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Drive safe." He kissed the top of my head, something he hadn't done in months. The gesture made me freeze. Not because it was affectionate, but because it felt strategic, like a final performance. Then he walked out the door. I heard the garage open, then close. I waited exactly 30 seconds, grabbed my purse, slipped into my shoes, and followed. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve was sharp as a blade. This wasn't guessing anymore. This was gathering truth. I got into my car, turned the engine over quietly, and pulled out of the driveway, keeping a full house's length between us. I wasn't a spy. I didn't know how to tail someone professionally, but I was a woman scorned, hurt, and determined, and that combination can make anyone skilled. His car drove down the neighborhood street like he was heading to the office. But instead of taking the highway exit that led to his workplace, he took a left he never takes. My pulse kicked up. He headed toward the downtown district, weaving through quiet roads, always maintaining a steady speed. I kept enough distance to avoid suspicion, but never let him out of sight. The deeper he drove into the city, the tighter my chest became, because I knew this area. Hotels, apartments, restaurants, places where people disappear into anonymity. He eventually slowed, turning into a side street lined with dimly lit brownstone buildings and tall oak trees. I parked a block behind him, far enough not to be seen. He pulled into a small private parking garage attached to a brick apartment building, one I recognized because I'd seen it in the receipts I found. Apartment 3B, she lived here. My throat closed. Seeing his car here made everything suddenly painfully real. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't interpretation. It wasn't circumstantial. He was here for her. I watched him park, get out, straighten his shirt like a man preparing to impress, then walk toward the entrance with the ease of someone who had been here many times. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. He didn't sneak. He walked like he belonged there. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my fingertips went numb. For a moment, I couldn't move. I felt like I was watching a movie, and my body refused to believe I was part of the cast. My husband, my partner, the man I loved, walking into another woman's building like it was his second home. Finally, breath returning in shaky waves, I grabbed my phone and quietly slipped out of my car. I wasn't going to barge in. I wasn't going to confront them in a blaze of fury, no matter how badly part of me wanted to. I needed proof. I needed answers. I needed to see enough to eliminate any lingering thread of doubt. The air felt heavy as I approached the building. I stayed in the shadows, heart pounding, watching through the glass door as he entered the lobby and pressed a button. A moment later, a buzz sounded. Someone unlocked the door for him. Her. I'd never seen her face, but I could feel her presence like a bruise forming beneath the surface of my skin. I stayed outside, hidden behind a trimmed hedgerow near the entrance, and waited. Minutes ticked by slowly. Lights flickered on in one of the windows on the third floor. Then a shadow passed. 2 shadows. I raised my phone, zooming in, but the curtains were drawn too tightly to see clearly. Still, the silhouette of 2 figures standing close was unmistakable. Eventually, the window cracked open slightly, and that's when I heard it. Her laugh, soft, familiar. Because I had heard it before, on the voicemail I found on his phone weeks ago when I'd brushed off the strange number calling him. And then his voice. Warm, gentle, the tone he used with me years ago when he loved me openly. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear slid down my jaw. The moment shattered something inside me, something irreparable. Not the illusion of a perfect marriage. No, that had already broken. This was different. This was the grief of finality. I pressed my back against the wall of the building, slid down until I was crouched on the cold pavement, and forced myself to breathe. Quietly, rhythmically, deliberately. After several minutes, when clarity finally returned, I wiped my eyes and stood. I took one more glance toward the lit window, listening to the distant murmur of voices that used to belong to my life. Then I turned and walked back to my car, not defeated, but decided I had seen enough. More than enough. He wasn't my husband anymore. He hadn't been for a long time. And tomorrow, he would know that I knew everything. When I woke the next morning, my eyes felt swollen and raw, like I'd spent the whole night crying, even though sleep had eventually claimed me out of pure exhaustion. For a moment, lying there in the quiet house with the soft morning light trickling through the blinds, I almost forgot what I'd witnessed the night before. My mind floated in that strange inn between state where dreams and reality blend, where nothing hurts yet because the memories haven't landed. But then they did, like a heavy book dropped from a shelf straight onto my chest. I sat up slowly, letting the truth settle over me like cold morning fog. My husband had spent the night in another woman's arms. And while I didn't know exactly what happened inside that apartment, I knew enough to erase every trace of doubt. Whatever we had, whatever love once existed, whatever promises had been made with trembling hands at our wedding altar, none of it mattered anymore. He'd crossed a line so deep, so definitive, that it carved a canyon straight through the middle of our life. My hand instinctively touched my wedding ring, the ring that once symbolized forever, the ring I now knew he'd replicated for someone else. The realization made my heartbeat flatten into something dull and steady, like acceptance beginning to crystallize. I showered, dressed slowly, and made coffee, not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed the ritual. I needed something familiar to anchor me before I confronted the storm. Somewhere between pouring the coffee and sitting at the kitchen table, a strange calm settled over me. Not peace. No, peace was too gentle a word. This was something sharper. A clarity forged by betrayal. At 8:14 a.m., I heard the garage door rumble open. He was home. He walked into the kitchen with a casual confidence that felt like a slap. His hair was slightly tousled, his shirt wrinkled, and if I hadn't been waiting, if I hadn't known, I might have believed he'd simply gone for an early meeting. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look like a man whose world was about to implode. Morning, he said lightly, opening the fridge. Didn't think you'd be up so early. I watched him pull out the orange juice, watched him pour it into a glass, watched his hand tremble, ever so slightly before he steadied it. That small tremor lit a spark in my chest. He wasn't as composed as he pretended. Roe Knight, I asked, voice deceptively calm. He froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see the flicker of panic. Then he recovered, shrugging casually. Late night at the office. We're really pushing to finish this quarter ahead of schedule. He still used the same lie, word for word. If I hadn't been so angry, I might have laughed at the audacity. Oh, I said, sipping my coffee. Because I drove by your office last night. His entire posture shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that I saw the tiny crack form, the crack where truth begins to leak through. You drove by? He repeated, too slowly. I kept my eyes on my coffee. Oddly enough, your car wasn't there. He forced a chuckle. I was out with some colleagues, different location, not the office. I set my mug down deliberately. You should pick a lie and stick to it. Consistency helps. His eyes snapped to mine, the first true sign of alarm flashing across his face. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, leaning back, that I know where you were. Silence stretched between us, binding. Thick, heavy, he swallowed hard. Where exactly do you think I was? You were at her apartment. My voice was steady, controlled. 3rd floor. Window on the left. The one with the beige curtains. His face drained of color. And for the first time, I saw the man beneath the mask. The man who'd lied to me. The man who'd betrayed me. The man who'd confidently slipped another woman's wedding ring into his glove compartment like it meant nothing. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. This is crazy. I don't know what you think you saw. Don't. I cut in sharply. Do not gaslight me. Not today. He flinched, a subtle movement, but unmistakable. I stood, walked around the table, and placed my phone in front of him. A single photo filled the screen, his silhouette standing inside the brightly lit window of her apartment. Not a perfect photo, not incriminating by itself, but undeniable. This, I said quietly, is where you were. He stared at the picture like he'd been punched. Then the excuses began. Ani, listen, I can explain. No, I snapped. You can't, and I don't want you to. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. The distance between us felt symbolic. What do you want me to say? He asked, voice cracking slightly. That I made a mistake? That I messed up? That I've been under stress and she? Stop. My voice was calm, cold, final. You cheated? You lied? You went out of your way to deceive me? That's not a mistake. That's a choice. He shut his eyes, exhaling shakily. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Then why was there a wedding ring in your car? His eyes flew open. He didn't have an answer. Of course he didn't. That ring, I continued, wasn't mine. It was hers. That's not an accident. That's not stress. That's not confusion. That's intention, engagement, commitment. Something you give someone you're making promises you have no right to make. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I let him sit there in silence. Not because I pitied him, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done settle into his bones. He finally looked up, eyes red. Do you want a divorce? The question should have hurt. It should have shattered me. But it didn't. Not anymore. I'd already been shattered the night I saw him step into someone else's life. Yes, I said simply. I do. His shoulders collapsed. When? He whispered. Today, I replied. Right after you pack your things. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person standing before him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe betrayal had carved me into someone new. But I recognized myself, clearly, painfully. And for the first time in a long time, I felt strong. He stared at me for a long time after I said it. Yes. Today, after you pack your things, there was a moment where I could almost see his mind spinning, trying to calculate, to negotiate, to twist this into something softer. That was his gift, after all. The gentle manipulation, the reasonable tone, the half-truths wrapped in concern. I braced myself for it. But for once, words didn't come as easily to him. You're serious? He finally said. Yes, I answered. Completely. He swallowed, his jaw tightening. Can we at least talk about this? Maybe we can go to counseling? Work through? No, I said quietly. You don't work through a 3-week exit plan. You don't go to counseling over a second wedding ring and a Greece itinerary. This isn't a crack in the wall, Michael. You tore the house down and built another one somewhere else. He flinched at that, eyes flickering with something that almost looked like regret. Almost. What do you want me to do? He asked, voice soft. Tell me, and I'll do it. For once, I said, I don't want you to do anything for me. I want you to do what you've already been planning to do, leave. Only this time you don't get to control the narrative. This time you don't disappear on your own terms, like the good guy who tried his best. You're leaving because you lied, because you cheated, because you made me feel crazy in a house I paid for with my trust. He looked at the floor. I never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed. You didn't want to face the consequences of hurting me. That's different. He opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again. A long, raw silence stretched between us. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life went on, indifferent to the collapse of ours. Can I at least get my things? He said finally. Yes, I replied. Take whatever's yours. Your clothes, your files, your notebooks. But leave the important documents and anything tied to the house. We'll sort the rest through lawyers. I watched his face tighten when I said the word. Lawyers. Reality sank in a little deeper for him. You already spoke to someone? He asked. Yes. His eyes flashed with something sharp and defensive. So this was planned. You've been preparing behind my back. I stared at him, letting the irony hang there. You had a 3-week transition plan to leave me. You were buying rings and plane tickets. You were sleeping in someone else's bed. Don't you dare be offended that I consulted a lawyer. The anger drained out of his expression, replaced by a tired resignation. He nodded once, then turned and walked down the hallway toward our bedroom. I stood alone in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of drawers opening and closing. It felt surreal, like someone had hit fast forward on the end of a movie, skipping straight from the climax to the credits. Part of me wanted to run after him, to demand answers, to ask why her? Why now? Why wasn't I enough? But another part of me knew that no answer would satisfy me. There is no explanation that makes betrayal noble. I went to the living room instead and sat on the couch, hands folded in my lap, the same place I had sat last night, pretending to scroll my phone as he left to go to her. The same place I had once curled up next to him with popcorn and bad movies, believing we were building a life together. He came out after a while with 2 suitcases and a backpack. Just like that. 17 years of marriage reduced to luggage. Some things are still in the closet, he said quietly. My winter coats, old stuff. I'll get them another time. No, I replied. You'll give me a list and we'll arrange it through your lawyer. You don't come back here alone again. Ever. The way he looked at me, then, hurt, almost offended, might have broken me once. Now it just made me sad for the woman I used to be, the one who would have apologized for setting boundaries. I guess I deserve that, he murmured. Yes, I said simply. You do. He set the bags by the door and lingered there, fingers tightening around the handle. Does she know? I asked suddenly. He looked up, startled. What? Does she know you're married? Really know? Not whatever version you fed her. Does she know about me, about this house, about our life? He hesitated just long enough for the answer to be obvious. Not everything, he admitted. I nodded slowly. I figured. The truth settled between us. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd been lying to her too, selling both of us different stories, hoping he'd never have to reconcile them. I'm going to talk to her, I said. His eyes widened. I don't think that's a good idea. That's the problem, I replied. You're not in charge of what's a good idea anymore. She deserves to know who she's really planning a future with. If she stays after that, that's her choice. But it will be an honest one. He opened his mouth to protest, and I cut him off with a small, sharp gesture. Don't bother threatening me. The ring, the receipts, the notebook, the photos I've documented, everything. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth, something you should have given both of us from the beginning. He deflated, some last strand of control snapping. I'm sorry, he said again, weakly. I believed that he was sorry it turned out this way. I didn't believe he was sorry for what he'd done. He picked up his bags and reached for the door handle. Before he stepped out, he turned back one last time. Was any of it real? He asked quietly. For you. The question stunned me. For a second, I saw the boy I once knew, not the man who'd broken me. Yes, I said. For me, it was all real. Every year. Every plan. Every sacrifice. That's what makes what you did so unforgivable. He swallowed hard, nodded, and walked out. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Just like that, the house was mine. Empty, echoing. And for the first time, entirely honest. I stood there listening to the silence until I couldn't bear it anymore. Then I went to my purse and took out the second wedding ring and the necklace. I carried them to the kitchen table and placed them side by side next to my own ring. 3 small circles of metal, 3 versions of promises, 3 very different realities. For a moment, I imagined hurling his ring into the trash or into the street or off a bridge somewhere. But destruction wasn't what I wanted. Not really. What I wanted was closure. Clean, painful, undeniable closure. I picked up my ring and slid it off my finger slowly. The skin beneath it looked pale, indented, like it was still clinging to the shape of a life that no longer existed. I held it in my palm alongside the other two. Mine, hers, his betrayal. Then I grabbed an envelope from the drawer and a pen. On the front, I wrote, "For the life you tried to live in secret." Inside, I slipped both of the other rings, the one he'd given me years ago, and the one he'd planned to give her. I sealed the envelope and wrote his name in the corner. This wasn't me giving anything back. This was me handing responsibility to the person it belonged to. Let him explain to her where it came from. Let him decide whether to lie again or finally tell the truth. Later that afternoon, after I'd given myself a few hours to breathe and cry and just exist in the rawness of it all, I opened my laptop and searched her name again. The same smiling face appeared. The same soft captions. The same life built on half-truths. My fingers hovered over the message button for a long time. I didn't want to hurt her, but she was already being hurt, silently without her consent, inside the same kind of illusion I'd lived in. And I couldn't let another woman's future be built on his lies if I could stop it. So I clicked message and started typing, "Hi, you don't know me, but I think we both know him." I attached a photo of my wedding ring hand, the indentation still visible, even though the ring was no longer there. Then I attached the photo of his silhouette in her window. And finally, I wrote, "I'm not reaching out to attack you. I just think you deserve the truth he never gave either of us. If you ever want to hear it, I'm here." I didn't send it right away. I read it 3 times, making sure there was no venom, no accusation, only reality. Then I hit send. I sat back, exhaling, feeling something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the beginning of something close. That night, I slept alone in my bed for the first time in years. It was strange and cold and painful, and in a way I hadn't expected spacious. There was room for me. Room for my grief, my rage, my questions. Room for the version of myself that had trusted, loved, and believed. And room for the version of myself that would one day move on. Not overnight, not neatly, but honestly. In the dark, I whispered a quiet promise I knew I could keep. I may have been the last to know the truth, but I will never again be the last person I protect.